You're listening to the Business for Good podcast, the show where you'll hear inspirational stories about companies making money by solving some of the world's most pressing problems. I'm your host, Paul Shapiro, and I'm glad you've joined us. Hello, friend, and welcome to episode number 127 of the Business for Good podcast. I first met the guest for this episode back in 2018, where he was pitching at a startup competition, and I was in the audience, and I can tell you, this dude electrified the room. He not only went on to win that pitch competition, which was very obvious from me listening to his highly charismatic and energetic speech, but he's going on to do great things, and we talk all about that in this episode. As a young man, G.W. Chu saw his family dying early of lifestyle-related diseases, and he thought maybe, just maybe, he could do something about it. With a last name like that, yes, Chu really is his real last name. Maybe G.W., which is also his real first name, it doesn't stand for anything, it's just G.W., maybe this guy was destined to become a chef, and that's exactly what he did. Because of his interest in Seventh Day Adventism, G.W. gradually became Chef Chu. He was experimenting with Seventh Day Adventist recipes, ultimately leading him down the path of opening up his own restaurant and now to being a plant-based meat manufacturer. His company, Something Better Foods, is already selling 6 different plant-based meats to school districts and to some Whole Foods market locations as well. As you'll hear in this interview from Chef Chu, unlike most plant-based meat, he does not rely on extrusion of plant protein isolates, but rather uses a layer-ization process that he pioneered using whole soybeans to make his brand of alt meat, which is called Better Chu. As Chef Chu says, it looks like chicken, it tastes like chicken, but it ain't chicken. In this conversation, I talk with Chef Chu about his life path, his alternative financing strategies for Something Better Foods, where he's been, and where he intends to take the company. If you're interested in the alternative protein sector as much as I am, you're going to love this interview. Chef Chu, welcome to the Business for Good podcast.
Hey, man, I'm happy to be here, Paul, man. It's been a long time coming, man. And so just thanks for inviting me. Yes, sir.
I'm excited. You know, the first time that we met, I'm sure that you'll remember because you were pitching at the Food Funded conference. And I think it was 2018 in San Francisco. Yeah. And I was watching you pitch. And there are all these entrepreneurs who are up there talking about their products. And many of them are giving these like dry, boring things. They're talking about like total addressable market and the gross margins they're going to get. And you got up there, you lit the whole crowd on fire and you won first prize. You won the whole thing. It was amazing. So what happened?
Yeah, man. So that was actually, believe it or not, I had just moved. Actually, I didn't just move. I actually just got really involved in the startup world. I was actually been a chef, restaurateur. We'll talk about that some more. But at that point, I got excited about getting into plant-based food manufacturing. I went through my first accelerator and I learned about that pitch competition, man. And
what was the accelerator that you were in?
CA Fun Good Jobs. It was a local program in Oakland, California that pretty much had a 8-week accelerator. I can't remember the name of what the exact modules was. It was 8 weeks. I remember I had did it, got kind of introduced to a lot of startup concepts, but done a bunch of restaurants prior to that. But this was kind of more into the startup kind of, building a company, opposed to, again, my background being restaurateur, brick and mortar kind of locations. Mm-hmm. So that was kind of, man, my beginning. But they had somebody had told me about Food Funded. I had came to the one in 2017. And I said, in 2018, man, I'm going to pitch. And that was a monumental experience, man. That was kind of my very beginning I found my first investors. A good friend that we both have, Nate Peter was there. I met him at that event and some other individuals, man. So it was the beginning of my fundraising journey. I got the, first place in that. I got to pitch at Expo East, and different things as a result of that. So it was a really monumental experience, man, that Food Funded experience.
Yeah, that's cool. And yeah, so Nate Salpeter, wonderful guy. He's a really wonderful guy. He and his wife, Anna Sweet, run the Sweet Farm for people who are interested in animal welfare. They have a farm animal sanctuary. It used to be in California. Now it's in upstate New York. We'll link to Sweet Farm in the show notes of this episode at businessforgoodpodcast.com. But you talked about the beginning. So let's talk about that because, people know you as Chef Chu, right? Yeah. So your actual name is G.W. Chu. And I was impressed to learn that your name is G.W. It isn't.
It's just 2 letters, man.
It's not short for anything. It's just G.W. That's cool.
Yeah.
And so you and I are both from Maryland.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. I know. I don't think I grew up in Montgomery County. I don't know.
Okay. I grew up in Calvert County, man. So yeah, not too far, about an hour or so from you, man. It's cool.
Very cool. Very cool. So what happened when you were a kid? Because I know that you didn't grow up as a vegetarian. There's something that happened to you as an adult, but you were always interested in food. So what was it that led
Yeah,
you
man.
as a kid
So
on
interesting.
this culinary path?
Yeah, interesting story, man. Thanks for asking that, man. So I was adopted at birth, which is I always talk about that story, and with a family that had a last name Chew. That's always the funny part, right? It's like my last name actually being Chew. It's like
Right.
who
This
would have
isn't like
thought?
this isn't a stage name. This is the actual
This is
name.
my actual last name, man. And
Yeah.
it's interesting because the black family, it's, most people think it's an Asian last name, but a black family. I grew up again, and we both grew up in Maryland, but I grew up in Southern Maryland, which was a rural part of Maryland, Calvert County. My father actually grew up as a sharecropper, and so very country family. My father's family was very just ate off the land, meat and potato family. They were farmers. My father shot squirrels in the window. He was like that type of country guy, man. Like he was a super country. But my best memories. I always talk about my memories as a child, man. Holidays, Christmas, Thanksgiving. It's you got the fried chicken, the ribs, the ham and the bacon and the mac and cheese, and a lot of soul food type recipes, a lot of heavy meat eating in my family, and sadly a lot of disease. So as a child, I saw again flavorful, good food, but again many of the foods that we grew up eating, was pretty much underlying the cause of disease in a lot of people that I loved. And in an early age, I saw many of my family members, early 40s, late 40s, early 50s, begin to have lethal diseases. And many of them begin to literally, die, man. And it was devastating. Losing aunts and uncles way too young due to cancers and different things, heart disease. Ironically, my mother's side of the family was actually Seventh Day Adventist, and many of them were actually vegetarians. And so, it's a new documentary on Netflix called about the Blue Zones, and it's a place called Loma Linda, California. It's a very big Seventh Day Adventist population. But my faith perspective that I grew up around was, a lot of them were vegetarians, and so as a child, I would go to my uncle's and my aunt's house on my mother's side of the family, and many of them were eating vegetarian foods. And this is in the 80s and the 90s, and a lot of that was like canned vegetarian foods, old school,
Oh no,
these.
I ate those Worthington hot
There you
dogs in
go.
the
So you know
can.
exactly what I'm talking about. Worthington,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, because I became vegan in 1993, and so there wasn't
So you know what I'm talking about. Exactly.
there wasn't out there the things
Yeah.
that we have now. But the Adventists were the big purveyors. There were like two things. There was like tofuti,
That's it.
the tofuti,
Yep,
which is
absolutely,
primarily
man.
for kosher Jews, so they would put out cream cheese, things like that. And the Adventists had the Worthington brand, which I don't know if it
Yes.
even exists anymore, but
Nah, it does. It still does, man. It
yeah,
still
man, that's
does.
awesome. Yeah, there were some other brands. I mean, there was like Boca was around
Yeah,
back
Boca,
then.
Garden Burger, the
Morningstar,
Morning Star.
yeah,
Exactly.
yeah.
Yeah.
So and it wasn't like like the world wasn't even in color yet, and we were walking both ways
Yeah.
uphill to like it wasn't terrible, but the options were not what they were today. But no, I remember the Adventist stuff. But you didn't become an Adventist though until you were an adult, isn't that right?
Nah, so what happened was, my mother, she wasn't attending the church, but she grew up in the church, and she sent me to church with my uncle and my uncle, my aunt. And so at a very young age, I started attending the Seventh Day Adventist church. And so on weekends, I would actually eat vegetarian food, and so every Saturday, went to church on Saturdays, and we ate vegetarian food every Saturday, pretty much from third or fourth grade all the way through high school. And so you can imagine, again, during the week, we're eating, meat and everything else you could think of. But on every Saturday, I would go to my uncle's and aunt's house, and they would have actually very good, not vegan, but very good vegetarian food. Tasted very well. And so I got exposed to vegetarianism as a kid and started making changes, around 12 years old. I stopped eating pork and things like that. And then when I was 17, 18 years old, I actually became vegetarian, and 18 became a total vegan. And that kind of became my journey. And again, it was inspired by my faith perspective, again, being Seventh Day Adventist, but this seeing, people in specifically my father's side of the family, seeing so much disease, just the dietary challenges that we're in, especially in minority communities, it really inspired me to want to, and pretty much, become plant-based. At that time, total vegetarian. We didn't really say vegan back then, right? It was like total vegetarian. And for me, it was a lot
really
of
funny.
Yeah, man. And it was curiosity, I think. So when I became a vegetarian, total vegetarian, again, that's vegan is old school word for it. But when I became a vegan, though, that was, again, I grew up eating all this flavorful, soulful, recipes. A lot of the vegetarian food. I mean, at that point, Paul, it wasn't any vegan cheeses out there. It wasn't no vegan butters out there. We was making everything literally from scratch. I mean, cashew, cheese, and, I mean, everything was like scratch made. And it's like these old school recipes, man, oat burgers and things like that, man. And
I remember, do you remember the Sunshine Burgers?
I've heard this. I don't remember exactly, but I remember seeing that name. Yeah.
I still see them every once in a while sold. So the brand is still in existence, but they're really good. Now, obviously they don't look or taste like meat, but they are a patty.
Right.
And they're kind of green, but they're, I loved, I still love them. I don't buy them really because I don't see them, but I still love them. But I remember reading about it because, there's no internet back then. And I remember reading about what I saw the word vegan and I thought it was vegan. And I was like, oh, these vegans, like that is really weird. And I thought, I was already a vegetarian, but I thought, this vegan thing must be like holding your breath. Like, you can hold your breath for a certain amount of time, but if you do it too long, you'll die. Right. Like,
right.
And I thought, well, maybe you can not eat any animal products for a week or two or a month, but eventually you're just going to die. And it wasn't until I read an interview with Carl Lewis, who talked about being vegan, or what I thought was vegan. And he talked about how that was helpful for him. And I worshiped this guy, like his poster on my wall where I lived with my parents at the time. And to see that, like, the best athlete in the world. Now, for those of you who are too young to know who Carl Lewis is, he was like the Usain Bolt or the Michael Phelps of that era, like the best Olympian, right? The most decorated Olympian. And to see that this guy was the, like, now a poster child for veganism, I was like, oh my God, I couldn't believe it. Yeah. And so that kind of gave me the shove. Like I thought it was probably the right thing to do, but then seeing that like this top athlete could do it helped push me over. And then I met people who I learned actually were not vegans, but vegans, and many of them have been doing it for a while. And 30 years later, I'm still doing it. So, it's I haven't died yet.
I love it, man. I love it. And like you said, man, I mean, it's, you see athletes, and that was, like I said, old school. That's like, he's one of the first, just the kind of trailblazer athlete to do it, man. But, for me, like I said, man, it was just, I wanted to, not really from a standpoint of like, I didn't really go into a career at it, but it was more or less, I'm a college student, just having to feed myself vegan. And, when you first start out, it's a lot of pastas and spaghettis and, ramen bowls and, this, all that type of stuff, man. But eventually, I started really getting excited about, replicating the things that I grew up eating, so wanting to create a vegan mac and cheese, wanting to replicate a vegan chicken, and so I really honestly started going through cookbooks. It was an old school cookbook called Country Life. It was this old, I'm talking about like a 1970s cookbook, man.
Oh, man. Did you ever go to the Country Life chain of restaurants that they had?
I did go to the Country Life chain. So you know about that, man. That's funny, man.
I know about it. I loved it. I would, every time I went to Boston, I set out like an entire like afternoon just to go to Country Life.
Come on, man. These are epic.
For those who aren't familiar, it was I don't think it's around anymore, but it's an Adventist-owned chain of vegan restaurants, and it was all you can eat.
Oh, you can eat,
and
man.
So think about like, for a vegan to go to an all you can eat buffet,
man. Yep.
It's like you've gone to heaven, man. Because most of the time you're going to a restaurant and you're looking for one thing on the menu. Now you go here and it's an entire restaurant, and no matter how much food you take, it's the same price. And you just can't believe it. So I would like fantasize about Country Life, but I didn't know they had a cookbook. That's really interesting.
Yeah, so that's where I began, man. That was like my foundation. Like it had all these amazing recipes, and it got me honestly kind of, and even my manufacturing principles that, since I self-produced manufacturing now, I learned the ratios. I started studying the combinations of, X amount of this, X amount of that, whether it's simple stuff like bean to water ratios, and it was kind of like I started looking at recipes, not like each individual ingredient, like 1 tablespoon of garlic powder, 1 teaspoon of salt or whatever. I started seeing the ratios of food and X amount of cashews, X amount of this. And, I started really looking at the principles. And that cookbook, man, crazy enough, I went through like every recipe in that cookbook. And it became like my culinary hub because, at that point, it really wasn't vegan culinary schools that was kind of popularized. It was just me taking old school cookbooks, man, and just going through recipes. And I wasn't afraid to kind of just step outside of the recipe. And so that began my personal journey of just creating food. It started with granola. That was my first product, man. Crunchy, bunchy granola. It says we don't box, but have a granola that will knock you out. And started making granola, man. And, I was about 20, and I was working with a team of young men, and we had a little granola business, man, making granola and bread. We made vegan bread, raisin swirl bread, oatmeal, I think oat and honey, these different breads that we made back then, man. And we made granola. We would sell them like door to door. Started working in small little commercial kitchens and stuff like that. But that was my first product. And, like I said, I started creating names, pleasing pineapple, peachy peach, the blueberry blast, it was kind of like this natural, like not really trying to make a company out of it, but just having fun and just the creative side.
So you were marketing even back then. Man, it kind of reminds me. I was looking today. You know that brand Bitchin' Sauce?
Yeah, man, I love Bitchin' Sauce, man. Yes, sir.
It's really good. But it's just an almond dip, right? Like imagine if they called it almond dip. Like their sales would probably be a tenth what they are, but because it's called Bitchin' Sauce, you think, man, this sauce must be bitchin'. And it is bitchin'. It's a great sauce. I really like it. It's a great sauce.
Exactly.
Yeah, but anyway, so they're taking principles out of the Chef Chu playbook here for the pleasurable pineapple or whatever.
Nothing like a name, man. But man, it was more of, like I said, started out as a personal journey, a hobby, a passion, wanting to replicate foods that I grew up eating. So having to do a mac and cheese, and eventually I got really excited about plant-based proteins. Nothing of the details where we are today in the industry. But at that point, I was taking like oats and potatoes and tofu, and I was just doing concoctions, man, messing with, gluten and kind of creating like these crazy concoctions. And I was just putting ingredients there. I didn't even care, man. I was like, let's see what happens. And I started my first little chicken wing that I created. It was I loved the KFC, Kentucky Fried Chicken, honey barbecue chicken wings. And so that was like my first knockoff. Like, how can I create the 20-piece honey barbecue chicken wing just like KFC did it? And so that was like my first, so I had this little cool, I took an oat burger the first time, man. I still remember this to this day. Took an oat burger, and rather than forming it into an oat patty, I turned it into like a chicken leg. And man, when I looked at it, I just died laughing, man. Cause I had eaten chicken for like maybe 2 or 3 years at that point. And I remember when I made that little chicken leg, it was like, oh wow, this didn't never think of turning an oat patty to a chicken leg. It was like, you just make oat burgers. And that became the very beginning when my mind started saying, let's make protein. And that was the beginning, man. And this just became honestly a 20-year journey, even to the day, just still replicating and trying to create plant-based products and plant-based proteins. When it started, I was about my early 20s, kind of replicating plant-based meats. And it led not into manufacturing at the time, but more into the restaurant space. And, that was my very beginning, and it kind of grew into more of the science and the development of the proteins where we are today. But my foundation, man, was really a passion to replicate foods that I grew up eating in a healthier version. And with the mission that, how can I create foods that I love, taste delicious and healthy, with the goal of, man, just helping my family eat better. That was really the basic passion behind what I was doing, man.
So, let me ask you about that, because, people have different reasons. Some people are highly motivated by wanting to do something good for the planet. Other people want to do something good for their family's health. Other people are highly motivated by animal welfare. I presume there's some combination of all these for you, including religious reasons as an Adventist. Yeah. But is health the primary motivating factor for you? Is that what gets you out of bed every day?
I think that's I would say health is definitely a driving force. I mean, I always say, man, save life. One of my most personal losses was my pops, my dad, man, rest in peace. My name actually comes from him, believe it or not. His name was Granwell Wayman Chu. That was his name. And I have his initials as my real name, crazy enough. But he died way too young, man, 62 years old. And, I'm 41. And just to kind of think, man, he died at 62. I have friends that are 62. And it was just such a young age, man, to pass. And it was lifestyle disease, just the things that, habits of life and it's, catches up with us, man. And so, for me, man, when I think about food, food is really medicine. Food heals. And when done properly and when done well, plants are powerful. And, I think for me, man, health is really the biggest catalyst of why I do what I do. It drives me. Yeah.
So we talked about the origins. Let's get to where you are now, because it looks like you have 6 different SKUs of the Better Chew product. And I know you're in not all Whole Foods, but you're in some Whole Foods. And what are these products? Like, you talked about how you're taking oats and potatoes. It's obviously not what you're doing today. So what are in these products, and what's the innovation that you have brought? Like, there's a lot of different brands of plant-based meat out there. Most of them combine, soy and wheat or pea or some combination of those three. And what's different? Like, what makes the Better Chew product different than the rest?
Yeah, man. I mean, our industry, most plant-based proteins obviously are based on extrusion, high temperature wet extrusion processes, which create more of a vertical kind of stringier type of product that's then utilized to create, burgers and patties and crumbles and, sausages and things of that nature. Our product is actually made from the whole soybean. We actually have a process that goes from the soybean to a milk. We create more of a horizontal kind of structure to the protein. So we kind of create this horizontal structure that kind of has layers. So we kind of create this kind of layer. I kind of call it like a layer-ization almost that we kind of do with the horizontal structure. So what happens is rather than it being a vertical, stringier, kind of like extruded process, we're creating like layers of protein, which we then, after we have the raw protein, we can cut into any kind of shape. So whether it's a tender, whether it's a nugget, we can shred it. So it kind of really has more of a shredded steak or a shredded chicken kind of experience. Whereas a lot of products might have more of a crumble, and it's kind of more, it's not really a shredded steak, a carne asada that you get on a real piece of beef. And so we can kind of create that real striated kind of experience, that you get with a meat muscle.
So is the Chef Chew layerization process cheaper than extrusion then, I presume?
Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely.
Because extrusion, extrusion is a fancy way of saying lots of heat and lots of pressure.
Lots of pressure, exactly.
You got to use, it's not only a lot of capital expenditure, right? Because you got to get the extruder, which is very expensive.
Yes.
But the operating expenditures are also very high to run extrusion processes, where it sounds like you're doing something very different. And obviously, I'm not going to ask about what exactly the layerization process entails, but do you have any patent protection on this? Like, is this a trade secret? Like, how are you protecting it?
Yeah, trade secret, man. It's something I've developed over years. There's definitely a level of steps that we've kind of, it's not an easy process to replicate. And so, we've been doing it for years, man. And that's just kind of our bread and butter. We got this striation process that we're doing. And our goal right now is to scale it. We were still doing it in a smaller scale, but our goal right now is really we've pretty much taken the last 5 years to really understand the manufacturing processes. It's very efficient, very not super expensive to pretty much, get the equipment to manufacture at scale. So that's kind of our next step, is really to commercialize the process. But man, that's been my journey, man. It's been a lot of years of this layers on layers on layers on layers of the process, and this tweaking and tweaking and tweaking, every single step, it's just as much of a science as it is an art, and it's kind of understand. At first, when I first started creating the product, it was kind of more out of accident. A lot of great products are created from accidents. You didn't realize, and then you kind of like backtrack what happened. But then I started understanding the science that was kind of happening, behind it. And, but, you can have a great product, but how to commercialize it into manufacturing production, that's really the part where we had to really take our time. I mean, that's where we are today, is really at a place of, how do we scale this at large quantities? I mean, I know what you're doing. I mean, you had to, you innovated methods that's not, not been in production, and having to scale that up into large, production. And so we're kind of at that stage now of ready to go to that next level to really scale up, our manufacturing. So.
Right. Yeah. What we're doing at the Better Meat Co is very different. First, we're a B2B ingredients provider, right? Like, we're not a CPG brand, but we're avoiding extrusion also, right? Like, so we're getting the texture through fermentation rather than through extrusion, which is a different ball game altogether. But you talk about a lot of the times about like democratizing plant-based meat, which I presume means making it cheaper, right? That's correct. What I mean by democratizing it. So how much cheaper? I realize probably until you're at scale, that's not going to be possible. But if you look at plant-based meat today, it's it's nearly always sold at much higher prices than conventional animal-based meat. So do you think that you'll be able to compete with animal meat?
100% believe it. I think definitely in beef, that's something that we can definitely compete in. We actually compete currently in beef we sell to school districts, for example. And we can actually, not the cheaper beef, but some of the school districts do get, more premium styles of beef. And per pound, we're beating them almost literally per serving. I think we're like almost 40 cents cheaper per serving.
What is that? Like, what is the beef? And then what is the beef wholesale cost that they'll be paying? And then,
so their serving costs, I can't remember exactly the actual price, but their serving costs, one of our school districts is like $140. per serving. We're at about $1 per serving.
Okay, right. And so the serving is what, 6 or 8 ounces or something?
No, not that much. It's about
4 ounces.
About for school districts, it's about 3 ounces.
This
is for school districts, so it's about 3 ounces, 140 on their serving size, and we're almost about $1, man. It's pretty amazing. So beef is something that we can compete on. It's hard to compete against chicken, because it's just companies that's doing that such. I mean, everything's done at scale in the meat world, but beef is just it's a more expensive protein. Chicken is just, subsidized so much, and it's just really difficult. But we actually have a chicken patty that we're actually about 2 cents cheaper with the school districts right now.
Oh, nice.
So,
if it's a 3 ounce serving and it's about $1 per 3 ounces, that's going to be roughly a little bit more than $5 per pound, right? And so, that's pretty good. I mean, I was looking in Safeway the other day at the Beyond Burgers. Admittedly, this is retail, not wholesale, so it's going to be different, but still, it was $5.99 for 2 patties, and these are quarter-pound patties. So that means that that's $12 a pound.
Yes,
for Beyond Burgers at Safeway, and I mean that's not like 20 or 30% more expensive than conventional hamburgers. It's like 200 or 300% more expensive.
It's definitely it's not, man. It's not easy, man. I always say, I mean, I don't. It's as long as meat is subsidized, it's just a very difficult thing for companies to really compete against certain products. It's just not easy.
We don't have any choices though. Like for those of us who are trying to replicate animal meat without animals, we like to talk about the crop insurance programs and all that, and I agree. Like I don't like that either, but we got to play the cards as they're dealt.
As they're dealt, exactly.
Being nice to say, well, we should be competing on fair grounds, but we got to just accept reality and know that we're not going to be able to. Yeah. So when do you think that you can get there? Like, what are the barriers to you being, you're talking about commercializing. Obviously you're in school districts, you're in some Whole Foods, like you have commercialized, but I made
a deliberate decision, man. I didn't actually go into a process. I didn't go the venture capital route, which nothing against venture capital. I wanted a more long-term play for our company, which made it slower to capitalize. And so we went more, very social impact investors, patient capital. And just as a result of that, we just had to grow a lot slower. I think to our protection, I do think there's 2 aspects. Those that did VC properly are still alive, and a lot of them didn't survive it. And so I think there's a fundamental reality around, sometimes the burners can be so much, especially in our industry, if you're not careful. But I took a slower approach on fundraising, which obviously commercializing something is going to take more time. And so, that's been one of our biggest, I won't call it biggest challenges, but just one of the decisions that I made, early on, that we took, capital that was, where we could, kind of just grow a company long-term and patiently, and that was a deliberate move. So it just created a more slower path to commercialization, to large scale commercialization. So, we're at a stage now that we're ready to go to that level, but go ahead. I know you had another question that you're ready to ask on that. Yeah.
Well, let me ask you, like, so, you're producing at a small scale now, as you mentioned. Is your supply greater than your demand? Like, are you able, if you got more, if more school districts came and said, hey, Chef Chu, we want to buy from you, would you be able to satiate their demand?
To a degree. I mean, we're in the process of building a new plant as we speak. And so in the next 6 to 8 months, we're going to be at a really good place to really kind of scale, but right now our current manufacturing, we can't. I mean, we had an opportunity to go into Costco at one point, and they was like, how many stores can you do? I was like, not too many. And their volume was just insane, man. I mean, so we couldn't go in any like super large opportunities. I would say probably another 2 years from now, we'll really be at that place. It probably takes another 8 to 12 months to really get our factory up and running. And so then it takes another time to get that all set up properly. But yeah.
How are you financing this? Like, are you doing it through free cash flow? Are you taking on debt? Are you taking on new venture investors?
Man, we integrated capital, man. That's kind of been our model from the beginning. So we do have a number of equity investors that has invested, since we started, very social impact, investors that understand the long game that we're playing. There is a part of our business model of ownership. There's not a lot of minority companies in the food industry that actually, own processes and own production and own their business. And so we really wanted to build something that, was owned by, a person of color, and that can actually create, jobs in their community. And it wasn't just simply built on the model of, we're not opposed to an exit but not just built on the model of simply to scale it at whatever costs and just, whatever it takes and how much money you got to raise. And that's just the foundation of how we grow. So we built with that fundamental value in place. So it's equity investors that understood that and believed in that alignment. Debt investors, we had a lot of CDFIs, which is definitely amazing for smaller, outfits, community development, financial institutions. These are banks that are nonprofits. They can do larger investments. It's not like they're just giving you 100,000, but these banks can give up to 5 or 10 million, depending on the banks. And so we've been able to partner with some of these banks to get our equipment, mostly equipment, for the most part.
So these are loans that you're getting from community development financial institutions.
These are loans that, that's pretty much helped to finance, a lot of our equipment that we've been able to get. When we first started, man, it was just bootstrap, man. I mean, we got leases, equipment leases and just, this stuff that has had to be done as a basic small producer manufacturer. And then so, all of that. And I also did some revenue type concepts as well, revenue equity type concepts, that we've been able to do. So it's kind of been a mixture of debt, equity, and then, alternative equity strategies that we've been able to do. That's kind of worked in our favor. So our investment model allows us to buy back the shares from our investors. And so it's really a cool model. We give them a certain, multiple on their investment. We're buying back the shares, as we kind of do that over the years.
And so so presumably you can't buy them back at any price. You have to guarantee some type of multiple.
It's a guaranteed price that we've already agreed to. And so they get a multiple, that they were looking for as far as a, return if we hit our milestones. And, so it's, we've been able to create some models like that. That's been in alignment, but again, raising $20 million on that model is not that easy. I wish it was, but it's just not. Yeah. And so, that's been the challenge, I would say, is that with the vision and the model that we have, it's just a slower growth pattern. And at first, it was kind of frustrating to a degree, like, man, everybody else is raising X. And it's like, but I come to appreciate the smaller, the slower process. And I think it's allowed us to learn some things and master some things early on. Over a longer, I always look at the story of the Wright brothers, as they kind of built the wing warp. I forgot the exact term that they used, but, they mastered, staying in the air for X amount of time. And they took time. They didn't rush the process. And that was they talk about that story when you read that story. But that's kind of been our vision, man. It's just really, it's okay it doesn't have to happen tomorrow. I've been a vegan for 20 years and I think it's, we're going to be doing this hopefully for the next 20. Hopefully we can get some answers and really scale this thing up. But I've been at first it was, again, it's a little frustrating the time. Now I've come to appreciate the journey and embrace it. And now we're at a great stepping stone and it's a good foundation that we've created as a company. So yeah.
That's great. You alluded earlier to saying, some of the VC-backed companies that haven't made it. Obviously, it's well known that there's a particularly difficult time in the alternative meat sphere right now.
It's tough, man. Absolutely.
Yeah. So, a lot of companies have gone out of business. A lot of companies have had to do layoffs. You've seen, Beyond Meat and Oatly, which are the two big publicly traded companies in the space, have had massive reductions in their stock price. What do you attribute this to? Like, why do you think it is? Is it's not just the VC-backed companies, it's the publicly traded companies, it's the startups. I mean, there does seem to be like something like that is a dark cloud over the alternative meat space right now. Like, what do you hypothesize is the reason?
Man, that's a very, very tough question, man. And it's something I think keeps us all up at night. I think one of the challenges I've seen in our industry, even when you read some of the public companies, a lot of them just simply don't have the margins. I mean, the food industry is brutal. I mean, the more you dig into it, I mean, you do B2B, but CPG, I mean, this, direct to, grocery, selling to grocery stores, et cetera, man. It's just the cost of this stuff is just so insane. Right. I remember in Beyond's, and my CFO, he had read their public offering statement. And one of the things that they mentioned is that they didn't know how they were going to become profitable. And that was in their public offering. And I think that was just something that most plant-based companies, I mean, there was excitement of the growth, but you fundamentally have to figure out how to make money in making it. And I think the reality is, there was a lot of excitement 2020, 2019, 2020, and excitement. It was super sexy, but most companies, I think was just challenging on how do you actually make money in producing this. You have the old school companies like, the Morning Stars have been doing this, they came from Worthington, but they, it's been around almost 70, 80 years.
Right. Yeah. You have these you have these legacy companies, not just Morningstar, but Light Life, Field Roast.
Yeah.
And Yeah, I was looking at some of the public statements. I mean, Tofurky had been losing a lot of money in the last few years from what I could see in their publicly available
Gotcha.
statements. They got acquired by a big dairy
But tofu
conglomerate.
company. Was it a tofu company or was it a dairy company?
So it's a tofu company that's owned by a dairy
Oh,
company.
no, okay. Didn't realize that. Okay.
So both, yeah. So
I
it's
got you.
it's like a big Asian dairy company that also owns a tofu subsidiary. And
Got you.
that subsidiary. But either way, yeah, and Gardein is profitable. Like they were, they've been around for a while. Obviously,
Yeah, exactly.
They've been around for a while, and they've been acquired and then reacquired.
Yeah.
First from Pinnacle Foods and now owned by Conagra. But yeah, it does seem like there's a real struggle here. These companies that are mostly just losing money. And I joke because, my wife, Tony, she has a somewhat similar background to you in that, she saw her family dying of diseases prematurely. And so she wanted to do something to help them. And so she started this blog called Plant-Based on a Budget
Absolutely,
to try
man.
to show
Legendary.
them how to eat healthy. And, one thing led to another. She never put any of her own money in. She never took any outside investment, just through revenue generation alone through Plant-Based on a Budget. She's got 6 people working for her now.
I love it.
And so, you look at that, it's like a successful business that is a very odd model, which is that they make more than they spend. It's like this model where they actually make something called profit. I don't know if they teach about this like business school anymore.
Come on, man.
It's like, it's like this amazing model where they actually have fewer expenditures than they do revenue.
It's revenue, yeah.
And so, like, what do it take for the rest of us to get there? And, I think it's really hard to see. I mean, even some of the ingredient suppliers like Merit Functional Foods, which is a big pea protein supplier to the alternative meat space, went under completely. So, there's a very dark cloud right now. And, I think that part of it has to do with having an inflationary environment where people have less money to spend on food.
Yeah.
Because alternative meats today are sold at much more expensive prices than conventional animal-based meats. It's like when you have more money in your pocket, you might be willing to spend more for things that you perceive as healthier. But when there's a lot of inflation, and you think that you're tighter on cash and you're spending less, you want to, spend less on food. Maybe this is one of those items that's perceived as a nice to have, but not as a must have.
Man, I 100% agree, man. I think definitely the inflationary environment has definitely played a big piece. And just speaking to a lot of the grocery stores, I mean, sales have been down. I think also the educational side of things. I mean, there was a lot of hype at one point. You had different documentaries that were coming out, and that excitement it drove the space. There was so many news articles kind of coming. I mean, Beyond and Impossible, I mean, did a phenomenal job. I mean, this in the marketing, and it was just that war between those two in a good way that brought a lot of awareness to the space. But like I said, things have definitely died down. But the need is still here. I think what you write about, and just the need of from an environmental standpoint. I mean, the need is here, man. And if somehow we got to keep fighting, and hopefully the prices of production can go down over time if we can figure these aspects out. So I don't have it all figured out, but I do know that, it's just something that, I always say, if the motivation, is there, the right motivation is there, people are resilient. We're going to figure out the answers on how to make this thing work, so yeah.
Right. Yeah. It seems like it's definitely will be born out of necessity because, you already see governments around the world starting to fund clean energy in a way that they haven't in the past because they see the environmental urgency of doing so. And I think it'll be very hard to ignore the elephant, or really the cow in the room here. And so my hope is that we'll see, an industry that has really taken off with venture backing start taking off with more public support, like public dollar support, so that in the same way that, countries in Asia have been publicly funding their clean energy sectors.
Absolutely.
This is why all the solar panels and wind turbines that we use in America were probably actually produced in Asia. We don't want the same thing to happen and have all our food be produced elsewhere also. So hopefully we can get more going in that. So fingers crossed that that's what occurs sooner rather than later, because there's a lot of companies, including yours and mine, that could probably benefit from that type of support.
Man, absolutely. Yeah, man.
No doubt. So let me ask you, you have obviously been influenced by a lot of different factors, whether it's Seventh Day Adventists or the Country Life Cookbook and so on. But, there's probably people who are listening like, man, I really admire what Chef Chu has achieved and has done so far. The things that you would recommend for them, that you would say, check this out. Like, I really liked this book, or some other resource that's been useful that you would recommend for somebody who wants to make a difference.
Yeah, man. One of the things one of my favorite books that I read years ago was Start With Why, Simon Sinek. I know it's a popular book, famous TED Talk that he did. But that for me, man, I think, been able to win a few pitch competitions, do a lot of storytelling. My why, I think, is, what's kept me going in the worst of days, because I mean, if you're in business long enough, you're going to have some good days, some bad days. I mean, it's going to be some days you're like, man, I am going to not do this no more. But when you have a why that's just bigger than life, bigger than this world, it's literally going to help save the world, as you kind of mentioned, as one of your, just on the thoughts you kind of shared, that's really important, man. And not really, I always say, it looks like chicken, tastes like chicken, but it ain't chicken. And that's a powerful, funny statement. People laugh and, it's like, well, it's not chicken, but I'm just talking about what it is, but it's not really the motivation of why I'm doing what I do.
Right.
And I think when we kind of drive from a place of the why, it really, really gets us up in those most difficult times. It helps the consumer to really understand that it's more than just a product. And I think that's something I'm even going back to. I'm even challenging my own self, so it kind of got to a place where, I got a better texture, and this and that thing, you're just competing on what it is or the benefits of the product. But really, what really makes your company special, what really gets you up in the morning, I think, and really bringing that message to our customers, I think is really the thing that really gets them to really just get super excited about what we do. And so that's something that I would definitely say, man, the old school Simon Sinek, man, just start with why, man. And I think that was one of my favorite books I always recommend, man.
Very cool. We'll link to that in the show notes of this episode at businessforgoodpodcast.com. And I totally agree with you. I mean, people sometimes have a romanticized vision of what it's like to found a company, and they look at only the success stories, right? And they're thinking, oh, look at this. These people overcame adversity and they succeeded. Most companies fail, right? Like 90% of startups fail.
Yeah.
And there's a quote that I love from Ben Horowitz, the co-founder of Andreessen Horowitz, the venture capital fund, but he wrote in his book that when you found your own company, you will sleep like a baby because you're going to wake up every 2 hours and cry. And, I think about,
I love it. I love
what
that.
I think about is like, basically you're beating your head against the wall over and over and over again. And some people will say, well, I'm going to stop because I don't want to break my head. And other people will say, I'm going to keep going because I think the wall is going to break first. And that's what I view running a company is like eventually, you got to have the belief that that wall will break. And I would not be doing what I'm doing. It's way too difficult and time and resource consumptive to do if I didn't have that North Star of my main motivating. I do care about public health, obviously, but for me, like animal welfare has been this very driving force for me. And it just wouldn't be worth it to me. Like if I was just selling widgets, like honestly, it would just like the idea of trying to get, wealth would not be appealing to me to do what I'm doing. So I hear you on that for sure. So let me ask you, like we're talking about starting companies and how hard it is, and you're going to beat your head against the wall and you wake up every 2 hours and cry. So if somebody does want to start a company in the worst of times to do it, like right now, what would you, Chef Chu, suggest? What type of companies do you wish existed that don't exist? Or maybe we need more of that type of company in the world right now.
Man, I'm always a big firm believer. I mean, you have the major, massive, tech food and massive, but I always like to say artisan food is just something special about that, man. It's it's not as sexy. It might not be as profitable or not necessarily profitable. It could be, actually, it is profitable. A lot of the artisan businesses are profitable, but I think there's these, as it was like a resurgence of, kind of farms and, local produce and the farmers markets and stuff like that. I think there needs to be a resurgence back of this simple foods, artisan makers just doing great, delicious ethnic foods that just taste amazing. Plant-based obviously is my, what I would recommend, but I think there's a resurgence. I think there needs to be a resurgence of that, man. Just some simple, not the grandiose. I think I always say, man, if you start small, build your customer, the big things will come. It's a scripture I always go to. It's in the book of Job in the Bible. It says, though thy beginning was small, yet in thy latter end thou shalt greatly increase. And I just a firm believer of finding, especially in food, artisan foods that connects with our cultures, our communities. It's always something there that's just never been done before. It's always that cultural food that can be veganized or made plant-based that just resonates. And those are the beginnings of a lot of times of the best innovation, that's not done in a, necessarily in a lab, as people kind of say these days, but that's, it's food. It's community, it's culture. And I just feel like it's always someone that has something cooking, that if you can commercialize it, start small, but then commercialize it and grow, those become iconic companies, that we all love. And so that's something that I always say, man, to start with that, you never go wrong.
Yeah, I think about that a lot. There's so much money, literally billions of dollars being put into biotech to try to get these like new foods that can do really awesome things, like bleed like a burger or whatever the case may be, right? And I believe in that. I really think people want the meat experience. So we got to try to replicate that meat experience for them. But I have wondered, like if the goal is to get people to be eating fewer animals and more plants, are there other ways in addition to replicating the meat experience that we could be going? Like, could somebody put a lot of money into marketing tofu or beans even? And are you familiar with the Butler soy curls? You know that product?
That's the Seventh Adventist. I mean, they've been around.
They're Adventists? I didn't know that.
Seventh Adventist, absolutely, man. Mr. Butler, man, he's been around forever, man. Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, man.
All right. Well, I don't know what old Butler is doing there, but I love that product. I buy it all the time. I eat their product.
Come on, man.
Yeah. And maybe it's similar to yours. I don't know. It's a whole soybean product, so I don't know what they're doing. But the point is, I think about that, like how far can you get with those type of products, which are much simpler to produce than so much of what is happening right now. It's not a substitute for what's happening, but it does seem like maybe there should be more people who are doing something like that.
Yeah,
and,
man.
The biotechnology attracted the venture capital dollars for a while, so it's understandable why people want to go that direction. But if you just want to build a business that has, low OpEx needs and might be able to actually generate real profitable revenue, that's the way to go.
Yeah, man.
So I'll include a link to Butler's in there. So
man, please, man.
I order them on Amazon. I get 6 bags at a time. For those who aren't familiar, it's a decades-old brand where it's dry, shelf-stable strips, and you hydrate them. And it's chewy. I want to say nobody's going to think it's meat, but it's chewy. It's chewy like meat.
Yep.
But nobody's going to say, "Oh, I can't tell the difference between this and meat." But it's good. It's a whole food.
Absolutely.
It's not a fractionate or an isolate or an extrudate. It's a whole food. And it's a single ingredient. It's just the whole soybeans that have been extruded. Yeah. All right. Is it extruded? Is it an extruded product?
I believe it is. I think he actually created a machine. I don't know exact technology, but I think he actually created a machine that creates these soy curls. And so he was an engineer, I think, and he created this whole process. And so,
all right.
Yep.
Wow. All right. He's like the carver of soy instead of peanuts.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, Chef Chu, it's great to talk with you. Speaking of GWs, George Washington Carver, by the way.
That's my that's my hero, man. I
is he really? Okay.
Oh yeah,
all right,
absolutely,
cool.
man. That's my hero,
nice.
man.
I'm glad I invoked him. That's nice.
Yeah, man.
All right. Well, tell Butler I really appreciate his service to my life for sure.
I love it, man.
But I'll be rooting for you, and I hope to see the Better Chew products on more grocery store shelves and in more school districts, and hopefully even in Costco in the coming years, because we need to democratize plant-based meat and make it much cheaper so that more people will be interested. So I'm grateful for all you're doing, man. And I'm rooting for your success. I've been rooting for you since I saw you at that pitch at 2018 Food Funded.
Thank you, man.
And I hope we cross paths again soon.
Appreciate it. Thank you so much, Paul. Thank you for your work as well.
Thanks for listening. I hope you found it useful, and if you did, please let the world know. Leave the show a 5-star rating on your favorite podcast app and share the episode with your friends. Who knows? Maybe you'll inspire one of them to be in the business of doing good themselves.